The air in Savannah, Georgia, doesn't just sit, it clings. It's a thick, velvet weight that smells of Spanish moss, river water, and, if you're in the historic district, the faint metallic tang of old money. My name is Elias Thorne. For 12 years, I've dedicated my life to the students at Benedict Arnold High, ironic name, I know, teaching them that history isn't just a list of dates, but a series of choices and consequences. I'm a man of modest means and steady habits. I believe that my marriage to Julianne was built on a foundation as solid as the cobblestone streets of Factor's Walk. I was wrong. I was living in a house of cards, and that night, the wind was about to pick up. Julianne was a whirlwind of sharp edges and designer labels. She worked for Vance and Associates, a high-stakes real estate firm that catered to the kind of people who bought summer cottages that had 12 bedrooms. As I stood in our kitchen, a kitchen I had personally remodeled with my own two hands to save us money, I felt a sense of pride. I had spent the entire Saturday slow-smoking a Wagyu brisket. I'd made the rub from scratch, balancing the heat of the cayenne with the sweetness of brown sugar. I wanted this dinner to be perfect. We were hosting the Millers and the Grants. They were Julianne's world, people who measured success by the height of their skyscraper offices. I just wanted to be a good host. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Give this video a like and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. The front door clicked open. Julianne walked in, her heels clicking like a countdown on the hardwood. She didn't head to the kitchen to greet me. She went straight to the sideboard and inspected the wine. "Elias," she called out, her voice echoing with a weary frustration that had become the soundtrack of our marriage. "I told you we needed the 2018 reserve. This grocery store vintage is embarrassing." I stepped out, wiping my hands on my apron. "It's a $40 bottle from a local boutique, Jewel. It's actually highly rated." She didn't even look at me. She just sighed, a long, theatrical exhale that made me feel 6 inches shorter. "It's not about the taste, Elias. It's about the optics. But I suppose I shouldn't expect a history teacher to understand the nuances of a modern brand." That was the first prick of the needle. I didn't know the vein was about to be opened wide. By 7:30 p.m., the house was filled with the artificial laughter of the Savannah elite. Marcus Miller, a corporate litigator who wore his ego like a badge, was holding court in the living room. His wife, Sarah, was nodding along, her eyes constantly darting to her phone. Then there were the Grants. David, a tech consultant who spent more time talking about his crypto portfolio than his children, and Chloe, who was Julianne's closest work friend. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I moved between them, offering appetizers I'd prepared, receiving polite, tight-lipped smiles in return. I was the husband, the quiet one, the one who provided the quaint backdrop for Julianne's glittering career. We moved to the dining room. The brisket was succulent, falling apart at the touch of a fork. Here I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the food would bridge the gap. Maybe the evening would settle into a comfortable rhythm. "This is incredible, Elias," David said, taking a bite. "You've got a real talent for this. You ever think about opening a BBQ joint? Probably make more than you do at the school, eh?" He laughed, a booming, careless sound. I forced a smile. "I love teaching, David. It's not about the money." Julianne leaned back, her wine glass caught in the candlelight. "Oh, clearly," she said, her voice dripping with a newfound venom. "If it were about the money, we wouldn't be living in a charming fixer-upper on a teacher's salary. Elias has this beautiful, romantic notion that shaping minds is worth more than a 6-figure bonus. It's adorable, really. Like watching a child play with blocks while the adults are out building cities." The table went silent. Even Marcus looked down at his plate, the awkwardness thick enough to choke on. I felt the blood rush to my face. This wasn't just a jab. It was a public disrobing. She was stripping me of my dignity in front of the people she valued most. The mockery didn't stop. It was as if Julianne had been rehearsing this performance for weeks. "We were looking at that new development on the Isle of Hope," she continued, ignoring my silence. "The penthouses are stunning, but when I showed Elias the mortgage breakdown, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. I told him, 'Honey, It's only 3 times your annual salary for the down payment. He actually suggested we stay here and save for a rainy day, as if it hasn't been pouring on my ambition since the day we got married. Chloe let out a forced giggle. Well, teachers get great benefits, right? Pensions and all that? Julianne laughed, and this time it was sharp enough to draw blood. Benefits? Chloe, the only benefit I see is that I get to pay for 80% of our lifestyle, while Elias gets to feel noble. I'm essentially subsidizing a very expensive, very time-consuming hobby. I'm the primary investor in the Thorne household, and frankly, the ROI is looking pretty dismal. I looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the woman sitting at the head of my table. Her beauty had become a mask for a deep, roiling contempt. I was the anchor dragging behind her ship, and she was tired of the weight. I stood up to clear the salad plates, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I needed the sanctuary of the kitchen. I needed to breathe. As I walked away, I heard her whisper to Sarah, "He's so sensitive. It's what happens when you spend all day with teenagers. You start acting like one." The kitchen was a mess of flour and meat drippings, a stark contrast to the polished cruelty of the dining room. I stood by the counter, gripping the edge of the marble so hard my knuckles turned white. "Breathe, Elias. Just get through the night," I told myself. That's when I saw it. Julian had left her phone on the kitchen island, tucked behind a decorative vase. It buzzed. Then it buzzed again. Normally, I wouldn't dream of looking. One, we had a policy of trust, or so I thought. But the humiliation at the table had cracked the seal of my restraint. I glanced at the screen. A message from M. It read, "I'm counting the minutes. The way you handled him at dinner was brilliant. He looks so small tonight. See you at our spot by 11:30? I've got the champagne on ice." My stomach dropped. The room seemed to spin, the smell of the brisket now making me nauseous. I picked up the phone. It wasn't locked. She was so confident in my submissiveness, so certain I would never challenge her, that she hadn't even bothered with a passcode. I scrolled up. The messages went back months. M was Mitchell Vance, her boss, the man who had sat in this very kitchen and complimented my cooking. They weren't just having an affair. They were mocking me in tandem. Oh, they called me the professor. They joked about how easy it was to hide their business trips from a man who was too busy grading papers to notice his wife's disappearing acts. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever felt like someone was belittling you just to hide their own guilt? I felt a coldness settle over me, a chilling clarity that replaced the heat of my anger. I wasn't just a husband being mocked. I was a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. The transition from a broken man to a calculating observer happened in the span of a single heartbeat. I stood in that kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator sounding like a jet engine, in the silence of my epiphany. Julianne wasn't just bored. She was predatory. She didn't just want out of the marriage. She wanted to destroy the version of me that existed in the eyes of our peers so that her exit would seem like an act of mercy. I looked at the phone again. The champagne on ice message was the final nail. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I carefully wiped my fingerprint off the screen with my apron and placed it exactly where I'd found it, angled just so, behind the vase. I walked back into the dining room. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic thrum in my ears. I sat down and picked up my wine glass. "Everything all right, Elias?" Marcus asked, his voice softened by a rare moment of genuine concern. I took a sip of the wine Julianne had called budget and smiled. It tasted like iron. "Perfect, Marcus. Just making sure the dessert is chilling. You know how I am, always focused on the little details." Julianne didn't even look up from her conversation with Chloe. She was mid-laugh, her hand resting on the table, the diamond wedding ring I'd saved for 3 years to buy glittering under the chandelier. It looked like a shackle. I spent the rest of the dinner being the perfect, pathetic husband. I laughed at their jokes. I let Julianne interrupt me 4 more times. I even apologized when I accidentally bumped her chair. I was building a monument to her arrogance, and she was happily providing the stone. I watched her check her watch. I watched her eyes dart to her purse. She was already mentally in that hotel room with Mitchell Vance. She had no idea that for the first time in our marriage, I was the one holding the map. The guests finally trickled out by 10:45 p.m. However, the air in the house felt stagnant, poisoned by the lingering sense of expensive cologne and cheap insults. Julianne was a blur of motion. She didn't offer to help with the dishes. She didn't even look at the kitchen. "I have to go, Elias," she said, grabbing her coat. "The Grant West account is having a crisis. Mitchell needs me at the office to prep the morning filings. Don't wait up." "Of course," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Work comes first. Drive safe, honey." As her Audi pulled out of the driveway, I didn't go to bed. I went to the guest room, the room I'd used as an office for grading papers. I locked the door and pulled out my laptop. I am a history teacher. My entire professional life is built on finding the truth in the archives. I knew that Julianne managed our joint accounts, but I also knew she was lazy with her digital footprint. She assumed I was too technologically illiterate to find anything beyond a Google search. I started with the joint savings. For years, we'd been contributing to a home improvement fund. On the surface, the balance looked correct. But when I downloaded the CSV files and started a line-by-line audit in Excel, the pattern emerged. Every month, there were maintenance fees or service charges that didn't lead to any contractor I recognize. They led to a shell company, J.V. Management, J.V. Julianne, and Vance. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was using my teacher's salary to fund the very companies she and her lover were building behind my back. By 2 a.m., I had uncovered the architecture of her betrayal. It was more than just a few $1,000s. Over 3 years, Julianne had diverted nearly $60,000 of our communal income into accounts I didn't have access to. She had been claiming losses on her real estate commissions to lower our tax bracket, while those commissions were actually being paid directly into JV management. This wasn't just a divorce-worthy offense. This was a federal crime. I found the emails tucked away in a hidden folder of her cloud drive. They were planning to launch the new firm in 6 months. The plan was for Julianne to file for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and financial incompatibility. She was going to claim that my lack of income was a drain on her resources, making her the aggrieved party who deserved to keep the house and the lion's share of the assets. I stared at the screen until the blue light burned my retinas. I felt a strange sense of peace. The woman I loved didn't exist. She was a fiction I'd helped write. The woman who actually lived in this house was a stranger I was about to dismantle. The sun rose over the Savannah marshes, casting a long, golden glow through the office window. I heard the garage door open. Julianne was home. I quickly closed the tabs, cleared my cache, and laid down on the sofa in the office, pulling a throw blanket over me. I wanted her to think I'd fallen asleep while working. She opened the door quietly, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes tired but bright with the afterglow of her meeting. She saw me on the couch and let out a snort of derision. "Still at it, Professor. You know, if you put this much effort into a career that actually paid, we wouldn't have to worry about the budget anymore." I rubbed my eyes, feigning a groggy confusion. "Oh, hey. Sorry, I must have drifted off. How was the meeting?" "Productive," she said, walking toward the master bedroom. "We closed the gap. Everything is right where it needs to be." She didn't know how right she was. Everything was right where it needed to be. I had the files, I had the bank statements, and most importantly, I had the recording. Before the dinner party, I'd set up a small voice-activated recorder in the dining room, hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the shelf. If you were in Elias Thorne's shoes facing a situation like this, what would you do? Share your thoughts in the comments. I stood up, stretched, and headed to the kitchen to make coffee. I had a full day of shaping young minds ahead of me, and one very specific mind I was going to break. Monday morning in Savannah usually feels like a slow, it's deliberate awakening, but for me, it was a high-speed collision with a reality I'd finally accepted. I didn't go straight to the high school. Instead, I drove to a nondescript brick building on Broughton Street. This was the office of Sarah Jenkins. 10 years ago, she was a firebrand in my AP history class. Now she was the most feared family law attorney in the county. I sat in her leather chair, the smell of old paper and expensive espresso grounding me. I handed her the flash drive. I need you to look at the JV management folder first, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Sarah didn't say a word for 20 minutes. She clicked, scrolled, and hummed under her breath. When she finally looked up, her eyes were sharp. Elias, do you have any idea what you've stumbled into? This isn't just a divorce case. And this is a RICO case in the making. Your wife hasn't just been skimming. She's been laundering commissions through a shell company to avoid the gift tax and communal property laws of Georgia. I leaned back, feeling the weight of the mahogany desk between us. She called my paycheck a hobby at dinner on Friday, Sarah, in front of the Millers and the Grants. I have the recording. I slid the digital recorder across the desk. Sarah listened to the first 5 minutes, the part where Julianne laughed about subsidizing me, and she actually smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. She just handed us the conduct element on a silver platter. In Georgia, judges don't like it when the higher-earning spouse uses their position to verbally and emotionally abuse the other. We're not just going for a split, Elias. And we're going for a total extraction. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had to go home every night and sit across from the woman who was planning my financial demise. I had to eat the dinner she provided, listen to her talk about her grueling days at the firm, and even endure the occasional pity kiss on the cheek. But I wasn't the same man. Every time she made a jab at my income, I didn't flinch. I just smiled and made a mental note for Sarah. Elias, the lawn is looking a bit public school, Julianne said one Tuesday evening, looking out the window of our colonial-style home. Maybe you should spend less time on your lesson plans and more time on the curb appeal. I'm thinking of having the partners over for a cocktail hour next month. And I'd prefer they didn't think we were struggling. I didn't get angry. I just nodded. You're right, Jules. Appearance is everything. I'll get right on that. I was busy, all right. I was busy working with a forensic accountant Sarah had hired. We were tracing the money from JV management to a boutique hotel in Charleston, where Julianne and Mitchell Vance spent their business retreats. We found receipts for jewelry, high-end lingerie, and even a down payment on a luxury condo in Mitchell's name, paid for with commissions that legally belonged to our household. Every piece of evidence was a brick in the wall I was building around her. The business trip finally arrived. Julianne spent Friday morning packing a suitcase full of clothes that were far too elegant for a real estate seminar. Ken, it's a black tie gala for the regional directors, she lied, checking her reflection in the mirror. Mitchell says it's crucial for my promotion. I might be late coming back on Sunday, so don't wait up. She looked at me, her eyes flitting over my worn corduroy jacket. Maybe you can use the weekend to finally fix that leak in the guest bathroom, since you'll be here anyway. I kissed her cheek. I could smell the anticipation on her. Have a great time, honey. I'll take care of everything here. As soon as her car left the driveway, I called Sarah. She's on the move. We didn't follow her ourselves. We didn't need to. We had a private investigator already stationed at the Dewberry Hotel in Charleston. By 9 p.m., I had high-resolution photos of Julianne and Mitchell Vance checking into the presidential suite. Oh, I spent that Saturday not fixing the leak, but moving my most precious items out of the house. My grandfather's watch, my rare books, my personal files. I moved them into a small storage unit I'd rented in a different part of town. I left the furniture. I left the budget wine. I even left the Wagyu brisket leftovers in the fridge. I wanted the house to look exactly the same, but feel entirely empty. Sunday night, the house was silent. I sat in the darkened living room, watching the clock. 11 p.m., 11:15 p.m. At 11:30 p.m., the Audi pulled into the driveway. I heard the muffled laughter of Julianne and someone else, Mitchell. He'd actually driven her home. They were so bold, so convinced of my insignificance, that they didn't even bother to hide the car around the corner. I watched through the slats of the blinds as they shared a lingering kiss in the front seat. Mitchell patted her hand, likely congratulating her on another successful weekend of deception. Julianne climbed out, smoothed her dress, and walked to the front door with the confidence of a woman who owned the world. She walked into the foyer, tossed her keys on the table, and stopped. The house smelled of nothing. No dinner cooking, no scented candles, just the cold, sterile scent of a trap that had already snapped shut. I stepped out from the shadows of the hallway. Welcome home, Jules, I said, my voice echoing in the hollow space. How was the gala? She jumped, her hand going to her throat. Elias, God, you scared me. Why are you sitting in the dark? Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in my story and share your thoughts in the comments. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the dining room table. Sitting there under the same chandelier where she had mocked my paycheck was a stack of papers 3 inches thick. And on top of it, a single handwritten note. The professor is finished with the lesson. Julianne didn't move. She stood in the foyer, her designer handbag still clutched in her hand like a shield. The air in the house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. A rhythmic, steady reminder that time had finally run out for her. She looked at the stack of papers on the dining room table, then back at me. A nervous, fluttery laugh escaped her lips. Elias, what is this? Some kind of weird anniversary surprise? Now you're acting like a character in one of those low-budget dramas you probably watch. Go ahead, Julianne. Open it, I said, my voice as cold as the marble floor beneath us. She walked over, her heels clicking tentatively. She picked up the first page, a high-resolution photo of her and Mitchell Vance entering the Dewberry Hotel. Her face went from a pale ivory to a sickly grayish white. She flipped to the next page, bank statements from JV Management. Then the next, the transcripts of the dinner party. You spied on me? She whispered, her voice cracking. You recorded our friends? That's sick, Elias. That's illegal. I stepped into the light of the dining room. What's sick, Julianne, is using my noble paycheck to pay for the house and the utilities while you funneled $60,000 into a shell company with your boss. What's illegal is the tax fraud you committed by misrepresenting those commissions on our joint returns. I didn't spy on you. I conducted a historical audit, and the history of this marriage is officially over. She tried to pivot. It's what real estate agents do. They find the flaw in the house and try to market it as character. Elias, listen to me. It's not what it looks like. Mitchell and we're just building a future for us. I had to keep it separate because you're so risk-averse. I knew you'd talk me out of it. And the Charleston trip? That was purely networking. We stayed in the same suite to save on company expenses. I almost laughed. The audacity was breathtaking. To save on expenses? You're $1 million producer, Julianne. You don't share a bed with your boss to save $300 on a room. Especially not when you're buying lace teddies at the boutique downstairs on my credit card. She lunged for the papers, trying to tear them. But I had already sent digital copies to Sarah Jenkins, the IRS whistleblower office, and the ethics board of the Georgia Real Estate Commission. It's too late for the shredder, I said. Sarah is filing the papers at 9 a.m. tomorrow. I've already moved my things. You can keep the house for tonight, but by tomorrow the locks will be changed, and you'll be served at the office in front of Mitchell. I spent the night in a motel, the kind of place Julianne would have called subhuman, but I slept better than I had in years. At 10 a.m., I sat in my car across the street from Vance and Associates. I watched as a process server walked through the glass doors. 10 minutes later, Julianne emerged. She wasn't walking with her usual predatory grace. She was practically running, her face buried in her hands. Mitchell Vance followed shortly after, looking like a man who had just seen his entire career go up in flames. The rumors hit the Savannah real estate circuit like a tidal wave. Word got out about the shell company and the diverted funds. In a town like this, reputation is the only currency that matters, and Julianne's had just been devalued to zero. She tried to call me 50 times that day. I blocked her number after the third. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to hear her tell me how pathetic I was one last time. I wanted the silence. The divorce proceedings were a bloodbath, but not for me. Because Julianne had committed financial fraud, the communal property laws of Georgia swung heavily in my favor. See, Sarah Jenkins was a shark. She didn't just go for half. She argued that Julianne's hidden accounts constituted dissipation of marital assets. Every dollar she had spent on Mitchell, every cent she had funneled into JV Management, was credited back to my side of the ledger. But the real kicker was the IRS. When they see a trail of unpaid gift taxes and misrepresented income, they don't just ask for the money back, They add penalties that make the original debt look like pocket change. To avoid a criminal indictment, Julianne had to liquidate her entire personal savings and sell her share of the new firm she'd been trying to build. She mocked my paycheck at dinner, but by the time the settlement was signed, she was the one looking for a studio apartment with a roommate. A month after the divorce was finalized, I was back at Benedict Arnold High. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was teaching a lesson on the fall of the Roman Empire. I was talking about how internal decay is always more dangerous than external enemies. A student in the back, a kid named Leo who usually didn't pay attention, raised his hand. "Mr. Thorne, you okay? You seem different." I looked at him and realized I was smiling. A real smile, not the tight-lipped mask I'd worn for Julianne. "I'm great, Leo. I just realized that sometimes you have to lose everything to realize you are actually holding on to nothing." I walked home that day, not to the colonial house with the public school lawn, but to a small, bright cottage near the river. It was quiet. It was modest. And it was entirely mine. The Millers and the Grants eventually reached out. Hannah Marcus sent me a long email apologizing for not speaking up that night at dinner. He told me that Julianne had tried to borrow money from them to cover her legal fees and that they'd turned her down. I didn't reply. I had learned that the people who sit at your table and watch you be humiliated aren't your friends. They're just spectators at your funeral. I still drive my 10-year-old truck. I still buy my wine at the local boutique. And I still love being a history teacher. Julianne thought my paycheck was a sign of my weakness, but it was actually my strength. It was honest, it was steady, and it was enough to build a life on, provided you aren't sharing that life with a ghost. If you were in Elias Thorne's shoes, facing a betrayal that was both romantic and financial, would you have the patience to wait and gather evidence? Or would you have ended it the moment you saw that first text? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for this story today. Betrayal is a heavy burden, but as we saw with Elias, sometimes the very things used to hurt us become the tools for our freedom. If you found this story powerful, please hit that like button and subscribe to Family Secrets and Revenge for more deep dives into the hidden truths of the heart. What did you think of Julianne's downfall? Did she get what she deserved, or was the revenge too cold? Share your overall thoughts in the comments below. I can't wait to hear your perspective. Until next time, keep your secrets close and your eyes open.